You felt this before. That feeling that something about life just doesn't add up. You go through your days, you do your job, you talk to people, you go to sleep, you wake up, and somewhere in the back of your mind, there's this quiet question. Who am I, really? Not in a dramatic way. Not in a way you would even say out loud. Just this small, quiet feeling that the person you think you are might not be the full picture. Alan Watts felt that too, and he spent most of his life trying to explain it. Clearly, simply, without religion, without science jargon, without making it complicated. He was a British philosopher. He died in 1973. But the things he said are still spreading today, all over the internet, all over the world, because people keep hearing his words and thinking, yes, that's exactly it. That's what I've been trying to say. One of his most important ideas was something he called the skin-encapsulated ego. Now that sounds like a big phrase, but the idea behind it is actually very simple. We go through life thinking that we are this separate thing, a person, a body with a name, someone who lives inside their own head and looks out at the world from behind their eyes. Like we are a passenger inside ourselves. Like the world is out there and we are in here. Watts said that this feeling, this idea that you are separate from everything around you, is one of the biggest misunderstandings a person can have about life. He wasn't saying you don't exist. He wasn't saying you're not real. He was saying that the way we think about ourselves, as something alone, cut off, contained inside our skin, is not the full picture. And once you start to see what he meant, a lot of things about life start to make more sense. The loneliness you've felt, the fear, the constant pressure to protect yourself, to defend yourself, to always be something. It all starts to look different. And the real reason this happens is not what most people think.
If you're enjoying this message, subscribe, leave a like, and share this with someone who needs it.
Now, let's continue. Think about how you learned who you are. When you were very young, people started calling you by your name. They said, "This is yours, that is theirs." They said, "You are a boy," or "You are a girl." They said, "You are shy," or "You are smart," or "You are difficult," or "You are sweet." And slowly, you started believing it. You started thinking, yes, that's me. That's what I am. This name, this body, this set of things people say about me. That is who I am. Now, none of that is bad. It's just how we grow up. We all go through it. You need a name. You need to know where you end and where someone else begins. That's just how life works in a practical sense. But Watts pointed out something very important. At some point, that understanding of yourself, that collection of labels and ideas about who you are, becomes something you protect very strongly, sometimes without even realizing it. You start spending a lot of energy making sure people see you the right way, making sure your image stays in place, making sure nobody says something about you that doesn't match the picture you have of yourself. Have you felt this? That tightness when someone criticizes you, even lightly? That quick defensive feeling, even when you know they might be right? That's not weakness. That's just what happens when we believe too firmly that we are a fixed, separate thing that must be guarded. Watts didn't say this to make people feel bad. He said it because he saw how much pain this way of living creates. Not dramatically, not in an obvious way, just this constant, low-level pressure of having to maintain who you are, having to keep the story of yourself going, every day, in every room you walk into. It's exhausting. And most people don't even know that's what's happening. They just feel tired. They feel like life is harder than it should be. They feel like something is always slightly wrong, but they can't name it. He could name it. And naming it, he said, is the first step to feeling free. But there's something deeper here that most people never hear about. Here's something Watts said that stopped a lot of people in their tracks. He said, "Look at your hand. Really look at it. Now ask yourself, where does your hand end and the air begin?" You might say, well, that's obvious. My skin is the border. My skin is where I stop and the world starts. And Watts would say, are you sure? Because your hand needs air to survive. It needs warmth. It needs food that came from the ground. It needs water. It needs sunlight. Without any of those things, your hand, and the rest of you, stops working very quickly. So are you really separate from all of that? Or are you more like a part of it, something that came out of it and stays connected to it every single moment? Now, he wasn't asking people to become spiritual or to believe in something religious. He was just pointing at something very practical, very simple, very physical. You breathe in and out about 15 times a minute. That air was just outside of you. Now it's inside you. Now it's outside again. Is it yours? Is it the world's? Where exactly is the line? Your food becomes your blood. Your blood keeps you alive. That food came from a plant or an animal, that came from the ground, that came from rain, that came from clouds. At what point did it stop being the world and start being you? Watts was saying, the border you draw around yourself is a useful idea. It helps you function. It helps you know your name and your address and what belongs to you and what doesn't. But it's not the whole truth. And when you start believing it's the whole truth, when you start believing you are completely separate, completely alone, completely on your own inside this body, that's when life starts to feel very heavy. Does this sound familiar? That feeling of being alone in the world, even when you're surrounded by people. Watts said that feeling is very common. And it comes, at least in part, from this idea we carry that we are sealed off from everything around us. But it doesn't stop there, because the next part explains why this matters in your everyday life. Let's bring this down to something very real, because this isn't just a big philosophical question. This shows up in your daily life, in very ordinary moments. Think about the last time you were really worried about what someone thought of you. Maybe before a conversation you were nervous about. Maybe before walking into a room full of people. Maybe just reading a message someone sent and wondering, do they like me? Are they upset with me? Did I say the wrong thing? That kind of worry comes from that same place Watts talked about. When you believe very strongly that you are a separate, fragile thing that needs to be protected, that needs to look good, needs to be approved of, needs to be seen the right way, then other people become a source of threat. Even people who love you, even people who mean you no harm, because anything they say, any look they give you, any silence after a message you sent, all of it can feel like a judgment on you, on your worth, on whether you are okay or not okay. Watts said this is one of the main reasons people feel so anxious in social situations. Not because other people are actually dangerous, but because we've made our sense of who we are so dependent on what other people think of us. We gave other people's opinions a kind of power over us. And we didn't even decide to do that. It just happened. Slowly. Over years. Starting when we were young. Have you noticed this in yourself? That moment when someone's opinion of you feels almost more important than your own? That's not a character flaw. That's just what grows naturally when you live as if you are a small, separate thing in a world full of other small, separate things. All of them judging each other. All of them trying to survive. But Watts had a practical question for this. Not a deep spiritual question, just a practical one. He would ask, what if you didn't need their approval to feel okay? Not because you stopped caring about people, but because your sense of being all right didn't depend on them in the first place. And this is where most people get hurt, because nobody ever showed them that was even possible. Here's something most people never stop to think about. The voice inside your head, the one that comments on everything you do, everything you see, everything that happens to you. Watts called that voice the ego talking. Not in a complicated way, just simply that running commentary in your head is the part of you that believes it is a separate, important, vulnerable thing that must be constantly managed. It says things like, I shouldn't have said that. What are they thinking about me? I need to do better. Why does this always happen to me? I'm not good enough. I'm too old. I missed my chance. Sound familiar? Most people hear that voice and think, that's just how thinking works. That's just life. That's me being realistic about myself and the world. But Watts made a very interesting point. He said, notice that the voice is almost always about you, about protecting you, defending you, evaluating you, worrying about you. And he asked, who is listening to that voice? This is not a trick question. It's actually very simple. Think about it for a moment. If there's a voice in your head talking, there must also be something hearing it. Otherwise, you wouldn't know what it was saying. So which one is you? The voice or the one listening? Most people never ask this. They assume they are the voice. They identify completely with everything the voice says and believe all of it, because they think it is them. But Watts was pointing out something simple. The voice is just a part of what's happening in your mind. It's not the whole of you. You are also the one who can hear it, notice it, and decide whether to believe what it says or not. This was one of the most important things he ever taught. Not as a spiritual practice, just as a practical observation about how the mind works. When you realize that you don't have to take every thought your mind produces as absolute truth, especially thoughts about how small you are, how separate you are, how alone you are, something shifts. It doesn't fix everything, but it loosens something. Something that's been tight for a very long time. But here's the part most people overlook, and it changes everything about how you see yourself. Watts noticed something about modern life that is just as true today as it was when he was alive. He said, we live in a time that teaches us to think of ourselves as problems to be solved. Think about that for a moment. From a very young age, we are told, you need to be better. You need to improve yourself. You need to work on your weaknesses. You need to fix what's wrong with you. And so people spend enormous amounts of time and energy trying to become a better version of themselves, reading books, following advice, setting goals, pushing themselves, feeling guilty when they fail, trying again, feeling guilty again. And Watts wasn't against people trying to grow or get better. He wasn't telling people to stop caring about their lives, but he was pointing at something honest. He said, a lot of that effort, a lot of that constant self-improvement comes from a belief that you are fundamentally not enough as you are.
And that belief, that you are broken, that you need fixing, that there is something essentially wrong with you that needs to be corrected, that belief makes you feel more separate, more alone, more like a small, struggling thing trying to survive in a world that doesn't fully accept you. Have you felt this? That quiet background feeling that you are never quite there yet, never quite finished, never quite okay as you are right now in this moment. Watts said this feeling doesn't come from reality. It comes from how we've been taught to see ourselves. He wasn't saying people are perfect. He wasn't saying don't learn, don't grow, don't work on yourself. He was saying the idea that you are fundamentally broken is not true. And building your life on top of that idea creates a kind of suffering that never fully goes away, no matter how much you improve. Because you can't fix your way out of a feeling that comes from a false belief. The belief has to change, not you. And for a lot of people over 45, people who have worked hard their whole lives, who have tried their best, who are still not sure if they're okay, this idea can feel like a deep relief. But it gets clearer once you see the next part. Let's talk about fear for a moment. Not fear of something specific, like losing your job or getting sick, but that deeper, quieter fear that sits underneath everything. The fear that you could disappear, that you could stop mattering, that life could go on without you and nobody would really notice. Watts talked about this kind of fear a lot. He said it is one of the most common feelings people have. Even people who look perfectly fine from the outside. Even people who are successful. Even people who are loved by their families. And he traced it back to the same place. The belief that you are alone, separate, enclosed inside yourself, with no real connection to the rest of the world. When you feel that way, truly alone, truly separate, the idea of not existing anymore becomes terrifying. Because if you disappear, then everything connected to you disappears too. And you feel like nothing was holding anything together except you. Have you had moments like this? Usually late at night, usually when things are quiet. A kind of dread that is hard to explain but very familiar. Watts didn't say, just think differently and it will go away. He wasn't giving quick fixes. He was saying, this fear makes complete sense if you believe what most of us were taught to believe. That you are alone, cut off, and responsible for holding yourself together entirely by yourself. But he also said, what if that belief isn't accurate? What if you are not as separate as you think? What if you are already connected to something much larger, not in a religious or mystical sense, but just in a plain, physical, observable sense? You came from other people. You live inside a world that maintains your life every second. You breathe, digest, circulate blood, none of which you have to think about or control. It all just happens. Watts asked, who is doing all of that? Who is running all of those systems that keep you alive right now? Is that you? Or is it something much larger that you are a part of? That question doesn't need a dramatic answer. It just needs to be asked. And sitting with it quietly is enough to begin loosening that fear just a little. And this is where most people get hurt, because they were never given permission to just sit with the question. There's something Watts said about older age that I think people in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and beyond really need to hear. He said, as people get older, one of the biggest things they struggle with is the feeling that time is running out, that they haven't done enough,
that who they are isn't big enough or important enough or impressive enough. And a lot of that pain, he said, comes from how we measure ourselves. We measure ourselves against an idea, the idea of the person we were supposed to become, the goals we had, the things we were going to do, the version of life we planned for when we were young. And when real life doesn't match that plan, when things went differently, when opportunities didn't come, when we made choices we regret, the ego, that voice that believes it is a separate, important thing that must be evaluated and judged, that voice becomes very harsh. It says, "You wasted your time. You could have been more. You're too late now." Does this sound familiar?
Watts had a very simple response to this. He said, "You are measuring a living human being against a fantasy, against a picture in your head of something that was never guaranteed to happen. Real life is not a plan. Real life is something that unfolds, that changes, that goes sideways, that surprises you, that knocks you down and sends you in directions you didn't choose. And the person you are today, with all the years behind you, all the things you've seen, all the things you survived, is not a failed version of something better. It's just the real version of you." Watts believed deeply that there is nothing wrong with the life that actually happened. What creates the pain is comparing it endlessly to the life that didn't happen. He wasn't saying, don't have hopes, don't want things. He was saying, don't let an imaginary version of yourself become the judge of your real life. Because that judge is very cruel, and it's not qualified for the job. Have you given that judge too much power in your life? Most of us have. But there's something deeper here, about what happens when you finally stop listening to that voice. So what actually happens when people begin to loosen that tight grip on who they think they are? Watts talked about this too. Not in a dramatic way, not like some big awakening, just in a calm, ordinary way. He said, most people, when they stop holding on so tightly to the image of themselves, don't fall apart. They actually feel lighter. That constant pressure, the pressure to be seen a certain way, to defend yourself, to prove your worth, to maintain your image. When that pressure eases even a little, people often describe it as relief. Not happiness, not excitement, just relief. Like putting down something heavy you didn't realize you'd been carrying. Have you had moments like this in your life? Maybe after a long argument finally ended. Maybe after you stopped trying to impress someone who didn't appreciate it anyway. Maybe after you let go of a goal that was making you miserable. That feeling of relief, Watts said, is what it feels like when the ego loosens a little. When you stop defending the idea of who you are, just for a moment. He wasn't telling people to stop having an identity or to become some kind of empty, detached person. That's not what he meant at all. He was just pointing out that we hold on much tighter than we need to, that most of the defending, most of the proving, most of the constant self-management, it's more than necessary, much more. And a lot of it is exhausting people quietly, day after day, year after year. He talked to a lot of people in his life, teachers, doctors, parents, workers, retirees. And he said one of the most common things people told him was, "I feel tired and I don't know why." He had a theory about why. He believed that a large part of that tiredness is the effort of constantly being yourself. In the way we've been taught to be ourselves, guarded, separate, managed, evaluated. It takes energy every single day. And when that loosens, even slightly, something rests that hasn't rested in a very long time. But here's the part most people overlook. The part that makes all of this not just interesting,
but actually useful in your daily life. Let's bring everything together. Alan Watts spent his life saying one thing in many different ways to many different kinds of people. He said, "You are not as alone as you feel, and you are not as small as you think."
Not in a motivational way, not in a you can do anything way, just plainly, calmly, honestly. He said, "The idea that you are a separate, enclosed thing, completely cut off from the world around you, is a partial idea. It's useful in some ways, but it's not the whole truth. And when you live your entire life believing it's the whole truth, certain things follow naturally. Loneliness, fear, a constant need to prove yourself, a constant worry about what other people think, a harshness toward yourself when you fall short of some image you've been carrying. None of that is your fault. You were taught to see yourself that way. Most people were. But you can start to see it differently. Not all at once, not through some dramatic change, just slowly, just by noticing. Noticing when the voice in your head is being cruel. Noticing when you're holding on too tightly to an image of yourself. Noticing when you're treating other people's opinions as if they determine your worth. And just asking, is that true? Do I really need to carry this? Watts didn't promise that life becomes easy once you start seeing things this way. He was honest. He said life still has hard parts. People still get sick. Things still go wrong. People still hurt each other. But he said, a lot of the extra suffering, the suffering that comes from the inside, from the way we think about ourselves and the world, a good amount of that can soften. With time, with honest looking, with simple awareness. You've lived a lot of life already. You've been through things. You know more than you give yourself credit for. And maybe the most important thing you can take from Watts's teaching is this. You don't have to keep working so hard to justify your own existence. You are already here. You are already part of this. That was never in question. If this message helped you, subscribe so you don't miss the next reflection. Leave a like and share this with someone who needs to hear this today.